Could Viktorija Golubic be on the verge of becoming the WTA's next major controversy? In a sport where sportsmanship and fair play are not simply encouraged but foundational to its identity, an incident involving the veteran Swiss player has raised serious and legitimate questions. Questions that the WTA can no longer afford to quietly file away. What happened during her match against rising Filipino star Alexandra Eala was not, by any fair reading, an isolated moment of poor timing. It was the latest entry in a pattern of behavior that has been accumulating across tournament cycles. And this time the spotlight is too bright and the audience too large for the usual institutional response of minimal consequence and swift forgetting. The tennis world is watching. The question is whether the WTA will finally act with the seriousness this pattern demands, or whether this moment will fade into the background like so many before it. The controversy unfolded at a critical juncture in the match. Precisely the kind of moment that makes its timing so difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Eala had won 3 consecutive games. Momentum had shifted clearly and unmistakably in her favor. The match was tilting. And at that precise moment, as Eala was preparing to serve, Golubic called for a medical timeout. What followed stretched far beyond the 90 seconds that WTA regulations permit for a legitimate injury assessment. The timeout lasted nearly 6 minutes. During that extended interruption, Golubic was observed engaged in prolonged discussions with the chair umpire regarding a line call that had already been reviewed and confirmed. The combination, the suspicious timing, the unusual duration, the extended argument about a matter already settled, raised eyebrows among courtside observers, analysts watching the broadcast, and players watching from elsewhere in the draw. Video footage circulated across social media within hours. Engagement around Golubic's name spiked by over 400%. A hashtag referencing the incident accumulated more than 18,000 mentions across Twitter and Instagram in under 24 hours. What had happened on a relatively minor tour court had become a global tennis conversation almost instantaneously. What makes this particular incident so significant is not the incident itself in isolation. It is the context surrounding it. This is not the first time Golubic's conduct has attracted scrutiny. At the Budapest tournament in 2023, she found herself in a similar situation after questioning line calls that had already been reviewed and confirmed, disrupting her opponent's rhythm at a critical moment in the match. In Monterrey in 2024, another medical timeout controversy emerged, though in that instance, legitimate injury concerns complicated any clean assessment of intent. Each individual episode, considered alone, could potentially be explained away. But the accumulation of these incidents across multiple tournament cycles creates a pattern that the WTA's own official records now reflect, and that pattern is precisely what makes this latest incident so difficult to dismiss. The WTA is now confronted with a decision it has been able to avoid making until this moment. Is this calculated gamesmanship, or is it genuinely poor timing that has happened to repeat itself across multiple tournaments against multiple opponents? The longer this question goes unanswered with meaningful action, the harder it becomes to maintain that the sport's conduct standards are applied fairly and consistently. For Alexandra Eala, the consequences of what happened on that court were immediate, measurable, and deeply consequential. She had been building something in that match. 3 consecutive games won. Momentum firmly established. The kind of sustained rhythm that young players work extraordinarily hard to find at this level, and that can be extraordinarily difficult to rebuild once it is broken. After the extended timeout, everything changed. She lost her serve in the critical game immediately following the interruption and never fully recovered her rhythm. Her first serve percentage dropped from 71% before the timeout to 53% afterward. Her unforced errors doubled. Her body language shifted. Her court positioning became more defensive and reactive rather than proactive and aggressive. The momentum she had constructed was completely dismantled, not through superior tennis from her opponent, but through an enforced break at the worst possible moment for the worst possible duration. For a 20-year-old still building her identity at this level of the sport, the psychological toll of an experience like this extends beyond a single match result. Lost ranking points and prize money are recoverable. The erosion of confidence that can come from feeling that the rules of the game were used against you in a moment that mattered, That takes longer to process and longer to move past. The incident did not stay on the court. Traveled. Within hours, the video had accumulated millions of views. Filipino tennis fans, already passionately invested in every dimension of Eala's journey, amplified the story across every available platform with a kind of organized, emotional intensity that the Philippine sporting community is known for. The narrative that crystallized in those early hours was pointed and straightforward. A veteran player from an established tennis nation exploiting a systemic loophole at the expense of a rising talent from an emerging one. The response extended beyond tennis circles entirely. Philippine sports media, typically dominated by basketball and boxing, devoted significant broadcast time to analyzing the incident. Some broadcasters reported their segments reaching twice their normal audience. This was not a niche tennis story that would be contained within the sport's usual conversation. It had become a national issue. The WTA launched an official review within 24 hours. A pace that is notably faster than the standard several business days that investigations of this nature typically require. The speed of that response reflects the institutional understanding that the optics of this situation demanded urgency that a slow, quiet process would not provide. Golubic faces potential fines ranging from $10,000 to $50,000 depending on what the review board concludes. If the findings determine that her actions constituted deliberate gamesmanship rather than legitimate medical need, the WTA has the authority to impose escalating penalties, and in the most severe circumstances, suspension from future events. For Golubic, the stakes of this investigation are not abstract. At 31 years old and ranked around 135th in the world, she operates in the tier of the professional circuit where prize money is limited, every tournament result matters enormously, and financial margins are narrow. A fine of $20,000 or more carries real and immediate weight for a player at this level of the ranking. A suspension would be significantly more damaging. Combined with her existing history of conduct-related scrutiny, a history that this investigation will necessarily bring into renewed focus, this moment represents a genuinely precarious juncture in her career. But the implications of this case reach considerably further than one player's career trajectory or one fine. This incident arrives in the middle of an ongoing and largely unresolved conversation about the consistency with which the WTA applies its conduct standards across different rankings, different nationalities, and different levels of institutional status within the sport. Players, particularly those ranked outside the top 50, have expressed frustration for years about what they perceive as a two-tier system in which the behavior of established, highly ranked players receives more lenient treatment than identical behavior from those still climbing. This case has the potential to either confirm or challenge that perception in a very public and consequential way. The WTA has also invested significant resources in expanding the sport's footprint across Southeast Asia, and Eala has emerged as the single most important figure in that strategic effort. The way the organization handles this case will send a message, heard loudly across the Philippines, across the region, and across every emerging tennis market, watching how young players from non-traditional tennis nations are protected when veteran tactics are deployed against them. This is not simply about fair play in the abstract. It is about whether the WTA's stated commitment to growing the sport in new markets is backed by institutional structures that genuinely protect the players driving that growth. There is a genuine tension at the center of this situation that the WTA cannot resolve through a simple fine or a policy statement. Controversial moments generate viewership. They drive social media engagement, boost ticket sales, and produce the kind of emotional investment from audiences that organizations depend on commercially. The Golubic incident has already demonstrated this dynamic with striking clarity. The engagement numbers around this story dwarf what most routine match results generate. There is a version of this calculation in which the tour's commercial interests and its integrity interests point in different directions. But that calculation, if it were to influence the outcome of this investigation in any meaningful way, would be catastrophic for the sport's long-term credibility. The trust of players, and particularly of players from markets that the WTA is actively courting, is not a renewable resource. It is built slowly, through consistent and demonstrably fair application of rules, and destroyed quickly when it becomes apparent that conduct standards are applied selectively. The WTA's decision in this case will resonate far beyond Golubic's fine, Eala's ranking, or the scoreline of a single match at a mid-tier tournament. If they hold Golubic accountable in a manner proportionate to both the specific incident and the documented pattern behind it, they send a message that has been overdue for some time. That unsportsmanlike conduct carries real consequences regardless of who commits it and regardless of who the victim is. That message will be heard in locker rooms across the tour by players who have absorbed similar experiences and said nothing because they calculated the cost of speaking up was too high. If the investigation produces minimal consequences, another warning, another note in a file that will be forgotten by the next tournament cycle, it will confirm what many players already privately believe, that the system offers unequal protection depending on where you are in the hierarchy. And it will tell every young player from an emerging tennis nation exactly how much the rules are worth when they need them most. For Alexandra Eala, the match result can be overcome. The ranking points can be recovered. What cannot be easily replaced is the confidence that the game she has devoted her life to will treat her fairly when it matters. That is what the WTA is really deciding right now.